Yeah, so my name is Mazi Nwonwu. I'm a creative writer and a journalist, and this is the Roving Heights podcast. In this edition, we talked about how to make a space masquerade, my debut collection of short stories. And we talked about the book, we talked about friendship, we talked about Omenana, the speculative fiction magazine that I co-founded and is managing editor of. We also talked about culture and how it interfaces with literature and science fiction. We talked about a whole lot of other things that has to do with creative writing and speculative writing in Africa and Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, so today I have a very interesting guest, someone that I'm very excited to speak to because something that he co-founded sort of like gave me hope in African literature. So today my guest is Mazi Nwonwu. This is his pen name. He's a journalist and a creative writer. His name is Nwonwu. He has a keen interest in exploring human rights relationship in the far future and otherworldly realms. When he's not weaving tales of the extraordinary, Mazi can be found pursuing the truth in his journalistic endeavors. He believes that truth, both in journalism and speculative fiction, are key to balance. Mazi Nwonwu is also the co-founder of Omenana Speculative Fiction Magazine, a platform for writers of the genre from Africa and the African diaspora. He is a keen lover of culture and tradition, which he tries to preserve through his stories. Thank you, Mazi, for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. So I'm actually very excited to speak to you because I have been a very huge fan of Omenana for a very, very long time. And I remember when the cover of your book came out on Twitter, I was like, what a remarkable title, how to make a space masquerade and other speculative stories. It's just really brilliant. So before we get into that, I usually read synopsis of books, before we start talking about it. But today, I feel like I want you to sort of like tell me about this book as if I've not read it, from your own perspective. Because I feel like synopsis is like, edited, all of that. So I want you to like tell it to me, how you're excited about talking about it.
Okay, so how to make a space masquerade is a collection of short stories that I wrote over the last probably like 10 years. They kind of tell a story of my journey as a writer of speculative fiction, sort of these kind of subgenres that I sort of delve into in trying to explore how I can best express myself as a writer. I've always been very, very interested in Igbo culture in particular, and then African culture in general, because I was young at the time when we visit the village and we find aspects of the culture sort of going away, dying. So we come this year, by the time we come next year, this very huge tree has been cut down. This shrine that was on the road to the village is no longer there. My modern house. So I kind of felt moved to preserve some of those aspects of the Igbo culture, of the culture of my village. I'm from Enugu State, from Ogula government in Enugu State. So writing was one way I could do that. It's been difficult for me to kind of juggle my creative writing and then my journalism. So I try very hard to juggle it. But then as Africans and Nigerians, we say you have to put food on the table. So journalism tends to take the bulk of my time, which is why being able to put out this book when I did is very, very important for me, because it was a struggle for me to kind of, amongst everything I do, sit down, write these stories, and then get them together. Some of the stories have been published before, but there are also new stories that have not been published before, that are kind of stories I kept and then wanted to use for this collection. So the collection is an exploration into African futurism. And I say that with pride now. But a couple of years ago, when Ned Okorafor came up with the term African futurism, and
Yeah.
yeah, we had this African futurism anthology. I had a story in it, and then we had this debate on Twitter about African futurism. And I'm like, I don't want to be called an African futurist. That's not me. I do other type of writing. But over the years, I've sort of gotten more comfortable with the term, and I can say, yeah, a lot of the stories in this anthology, in this collection, sorry, are African futurism stories, in the sense that they show what could be in the future when you have Africans domiciled in this far future, but then still retaining aspects of their culture and then their way of life. The way I write stories and the way I kind of write my stories, which I sort of try to learn or practice over the years to make it very accessible to people. I don't want somebody to get so caught up in the science or get so caught up in the magic.
Yeah.
And then I want it to be accessible. So I write the stories as I wouldn't say easy, but as simple as I can. That's what I try to do with the story. And then I will give kind of an example of what I'm talking about. So years ago, I remember I was having this conversation with Emmanuel Iduma about creative fiction and science fiction. And he's not somebody who cared about science at that point in time. So, but I told him, I said, look, it is the same thing with the conventional literary fiction that you have. It is just that it is either set in the future, it's set in somewhere far removed from here, in another dimension, or whatever, but it's still people existing, people coming to terms with their life, people coming to terms with their reality. So it's not so different from the average story that any writer will write anywhere. And that's what I have in this collection. It's still the simple human story, the story of a boy who met a girl, fell in love, the story of people coming to terms with changes in their life, the story of a young man coming of age, the story of people sort of coming to terms with their culture in the far future. So it's like different stories written in different ways. So you have the science fiction elements here, you have the fantasy and magical realism. You have all of that together. Yeah, but one thing I tried to do was I tried to center the stories in a world I created. So you'll find elements of that world in all of the stories, or in most of the stories. I sort of tie them together, be it the technology that you find in use, be it words that are kind of common across some of the stories. So that's where I kind of used to tie the stories together. Yeah.
That's interesting, because that was what I wanted to open with, because I found that very beautiful. You know, it makes it easier to sort of like follow the stories when a piece of technology here or something here, it sort of like comes together and creates like this very universe or this framework, which
it is actually a universe I created. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that was really good, and I wanted to know if that was something that you were very intentional about, or was it something that happened as you were writing?
No, I was very intentional about it. I think the very first attempt I had of writing was I wanted to write a novel. So I did start like people start writing short stories. I started writing a novel, and I lost the manuscript years back, but that novel was set in a place I called the Land of the Seven Hills. So that Land of the
Seven Hills,
that you see that reference of Seven Hills across a lot of the stories. So
yeah,
I said a lot of stories that I write, even the ones I'm working on now, are still set within this Land of the Seven Hills. So the entire universe, I don't have a name for the universe yet, but the Seven Hills is one of the basically it's in a planet, Earth-like planet within that universe. So you have other stories set in other kind of. It's like I don't have a name for the universe, but yeah, I did create a universe. So it was intentional, and then a lot of my stories are set there.
That's really nice.
Some are also on Earth, some are also on the way Earth.
I noticed that. So you are a journalist and also a writer, and I wanted to wanted you to talk about the intersection of the two, because I know that being a journalist means that has always been a part of your life, documenting stories, writing about stories, writing about people's truths. So
Yeah.
how has that bled into your fiction? How has that influenced your fiction?
So one thing I've always known about my writing and my fiction is I hold truth as being very, very important. And I remember years ago when I was at the Farafina workshop, Bian Vagan Wainena was one of our people who came and taught us at the workshop. And he said something about fiction, that your fiction must be true. So it's fiction, but it must be true in the sense that whatever you write should be true within the world you create. Okay. So if you're saying somebody's flying in that story, it should be believable within the context and within the world that you've created. So truth is very, very important to me, both in fiction and even more so in my journalism. So I've done a lot of controversial stories over the years, and people tend to always think that I do these controversial stories because I have an agenda. The only agenda I've ever had in my life is truth. And okay. I'm so much tied to truth and so much enslaved to the pursuit of truth that it sort of gives me a pinhole view. Everything that is not truthful, I don't care. And it makes it very difficult to have conversations with me if you are arguing with me, because I'll be like, no, yes, I know that there are gray areas, but what is the truth? Let's focus on the truth. So my journalism has been so focused on pursuit of truth, and also in my literature, I try very, very hard to make sure that, okay, whatever I'm writing, if I'm talking about real things, they have to be real to the letter. I try as hard as possible to make sure it is true, it is believable. If you are reading, let it be that you get engrossed in the story to the point that you believe that what you are reading is possible or probable within the context of that story that you are reading. So that's what informed my writing. And like I say, I've always wanted to use it to preserve my culture. So you find that when I write, I bring in elements of my culture that I know, and then I infuse them into the story, because I always say that I believe that is one way for somebody 200 years from now to read the story and then say, oh, so this happened, or this is real. Just about the same way when you read Things Fall Apart or Arrow of God, any of Achabe's books, it's sort of, it's like I wouldn't call it an encyclopedia, but it's like a of the cultural attributes of that time. You almost, you don't want to quarrel with it. You don't want to say, no, this did not happen. You believe it because that's how the story was written, and that's how I try to write my stories. So I think that's probably how journalism and literature intersect for me. But I think I was first a creative writer before I became. So I became a journalist as a means to put food on the table, and it was what was closest to literature in the sense. So if I had a job, or if I had gotten a book, what do you call it now? If I had gotten, if I'd be commissioned to write a book by a publisher, and then they say, okay, I'm going to do one book every year, I probably would be writing full time now. But they will need to put food on the table, and then literature is what was closest. No, journalism was what was closest to literature. So it was like, oh, I write stories, I also write essays, and then it sort of came easy for me to be a journalist, more or less.
Yeah, I definitely understand that, especially in this part of the world where literature was very little to put food on your table. But we are here, we are going through a renaissance, we are trying, especially Nigeria, we're putting out more books, people are reading, a lot of people are engaging, so that's really, really good. So I wanted to talk about Masquerade before we continue, because I have this very funny story. When I was little, and that thing you said about going to the village and finding out things are disappearing was so true, because I used to go to the village like in the late 2010s. So
Yeah,
it's sort of like, something, a culture thing. My grandmother was very close with her. I go every Easter personally. My
yeah,
siblings, they don't go, but I go. So one of those times, I think it was a Christmas period, a masquerade chased me in
mm,
the village. And I remember running and thinking that I outran the thing. And you know this thing when you're
yeah,
running and your hand is, doing your hand like this. And you
yeah.
listen to hear, the thing just
And your
flew.
head is like almost touching the back of your head.
Exactly. And then he just flogged me at the back of my head. Since that day, I don't know, I didn't hit him masquerade. I was like, you
Okay.
that hurts me. Instead of like forced me to every time I look at
Yeah,
it, I'll just be first of all, it was fear, and then it grew to resentment and
yeah,
all of that. So you said that the reason why you put your culture is to preserve them.
yeah,
But can we also say that you put them because you're maybe fascinated by them?
yeah.
Maybe, right? So
I'm superbly fascinated about my culture. I'm still learning about it. I went home last December. I spent 1 month in the village for the first time in many years. I spent 1 full month
wow.
in the village and I learned so much. I learned so much. As in, I wish I had time to. I'm working on the book, so I'm probably going to pour a lot of what I learned last year into my
That's
that
really good.
that I've not paid attention. I didn't used to pay that much. I pay attention, but I'm not an adult, so I'm not allowed into the circle of elders in a way I wasn't allowed before I got
Yeah.
married. I was much younger, because I used to travel a lot when I was much younger, but I wasn't allowed in the way I was allowed in last year that I went. So I saw a lot of cultural attribute. I saw a lot of burial rites. I was documenting in my mind, this person died, this is how you bury, you need to bring this, the first son need to kill a goat. If you
Yes.
cow for your dad, you cannot give a cow to somebody else. If you've not killed a goat for your dad, if you've not buried your dad, or if your dad is dead, you've not buried him, you cannot attend another person's burial and eat there. So there were a lot of things that I was sort of soaking in. So I've always been fascinated about
Mm.
culture.
So yeah,
I didn't grow up in the
yeah,
village. So
yeah, yeah,
I grew
yeah.
up in the north in Kaduna.
Okay.
So I'm more of a Kaduna boy than an Enugu boy or a
Yeah.
Lagos boy. Kaduna used to be like asking me, where's my town? Kaduna was my town. But the fascination for the culture um, came from quite a very young age. And then when I think I was like 12 years or 13 years, can't remember for a fact, but when I joined the Masquerade Society, even though I joined the Masquerade Society, then I never became like a member that we done the Masquerade and also, but I got sort of involved in the culture. And then I knew the secret behind it, all of that stuff. Yeah, the fear, even me, there are some masquerades that I will still be very afraid of today.
Yeah.
And I think the fear for the masquerade, I don't know if I would say it's inherent or subconscious for most of us, because a lot of us had the dream of the masquerade, the dream where the masquerade is chasing you. So it's like primal fear. It's something that is quite common with people from uh, my culture and people from maybe the south of Nigeria. So
Yeah.
fascinated by culture, and then I try to learn because there's just a lot. You'll be shocked at some of the stories you hear. You'll be shocked at some of the things that people do that is culture. Yeah, there are a lot of them that you can say are probably not something that gel with modernity. But then if you speak to an elder who knows his onions, they'll tell you why they had that in place when they had that in place. Because
Mm.
everything had a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed I think it was in the main story, in the story that has the title on the cover. I'm still going to get to that.
Yeah.
But I noticed that the way you explained the process, the way you showed the process, it was very intimate. And I was going to ask if it was something that you researched about, but now that you've said that you were initiated earlier, it makes
Yeah, I
sense.
was initiated.
It makes a
I
lot
was
of
initiated.
sense.
So that story, the funny thing about that story is that I don't know if I should say it's actually a true story, and it's actually a very
Ooh.
personal. It's okay. I would say the source story is a true
Okay,
story.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
source story is a true. Yeah, it's set in the future, but it's actually
Yes.
from something that happened real in this
Yeah.
time and in this place. And
But
it's
is that is that including? I don't want to give spoilers, but is that including the fire thing? Was the
No,
fire
no, no,
thing
no. The fire thing, not the
okay?
fire thing, but the running itself, because the running. So the idea of a competition between kindreds or between,
Mm,
because okay, let's talk a little bit about masquerades now. So these days, you have young children at home. When they ask for toy, you get them GI Joe, you get
mm-hmm.
them man. Okay, in the past, if children ask for toy, they probably get the carving of a masquerade. And then
Oh.
you get to a certain age, you are not a member of the masquerade society, but you want to imitate the masquerades you see around you. So children are allowed to make their own masquerade, go around with their gongs, and even beg for money. And even in major festivals, children are allowed to
Mm,
also come to their own masquerade. It's just for play, though, not the real
yeah.
thing. That's how they graduate from that children masquerade to the real thing. So that story was more about that aspect of it. And I took it from now up into the future, sort of a way to sort of preserve that wonder that
Mm.
it.
That's very well done. And how exactly do you make a space masquerade? That's a very beautiful title. Like, how did it come to you? Because when I said it, I was like, this is just, it gets you very curious about the books. It gets you very interested about the book. And when I read the actual story, it makes sense, because it
Yeah.
shows how you make a space masquerade. But how did the
Yeah.
title come to you?
The title was I wouldn't okay I would say it was original to me, but it wasn't original to the story. The story had a
Oh,
different title from the get-go.
okay.
Had a
Okay.
different title from the get-go. But then why when we finished and then we needed to change up the titles for some of the stories, sort of give them more interesting titles, I started digging with my editor. Then we started talking about the title. What title should the story have? What title should the story have? And I felt, okay, this story is about making a masquerade. These people, well, not necessarily in space, but in space from an Earth's point of view. Because if somebody is a Mars, you say the person is in space actually. So from
Yes,
point of view,
yeah.
they are in space, even though they're in a different planet. So that sort of was what gave rise to the title that we now have. And then when we needed to have a title for the book, it was a fitting title. The initial title we had was a title for another story in the collection. That was the title we had for the book, but
Mm.
sort of felt, okay, which title would best sell this book and sort of give an idea of what the book is about. I know the book is about masquerade. There's a lot of culture in it. There's also a lot of science in it, a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and
Yeah.
masquerade in space is one way to bridge that gap between science fiction, fantasy, and magic realism. So that was what sort of gave rise to us using that as a title of the book.
No, it works really. It works very well. So, there's something I noticed, which there are of course a lot of themes across these different stories, but
Yeah.
I kept picking up on identity, and this makes a lot of sense to me because because you co-founded something like Minana, which is a
Yeah.
magazine that is trying to preserve the identity of African writers in the speculative genre. So
Yeah.
in the story, in the book, there's like this recurring theme of identity. It was there. I first noticed this in the first story, the rainmaker. So Bama was trying to, there was this sort of like identity crisis that was going on about being a rainmaker, and then that being something that is not real. And then Dadzi, I hope I'm getting his name right.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes, Dadzi is trying to figure out if he's human, if what it means, for his life to be. So he keeps, running away from his life and escaping into virtual reality and all of that. So
Yeah.
how would you say, was this something that you were aware of, and what do you think about identity in your work?
Yeah. Okay. I became aware of it much later, but not in the course of writing the stories. You know how
Mm,
stories are. You write a
yeah.
story with one thing in mind, and then by the time you are done, you find out that there are aspects of visage of vestige of other things within those stories that you've written. So identity is actually very important to me because it's something that I know I personally struggle with. I am one person who is called different names in different places. And it's been something that I've had to like deal with all throughout my life. If I'm with my mom, I get called a particular name. If I'm with my friends who went to primary school with me, I get called a different name.
Particularly,
If I'm with my
yeah.
friends who went to university with me, I get called a different name. If I'm with my friends who work with me, I get called a different name. So, and then if I'm with my friends who know me in the literary community, I get called a different name. So I've always been somebody who, I wouldn't say I struggle with my identity, but I struggle with a name for myself, a name that I don't know. I wouldn't say a name that I am comfortable with, but I think I'm comfortable with all of my names. But when you are growing and
more like a name that captures all the essence of your life.
yes, basically. So a name that I feel is true to me. So I say it this way. When I was going to primary school, basically people who came from some of my classmates were neighbors. So everybody hears the name you are being called at home. And that's the name that somehow you get called in school. So everybody called me Chiagozie. You get not Chiagozie, people called me Chigozie because then everyone was bastardizing, sorry to use the word. Everybody was sort of calling me Chigozie. But my name is Chiagozie, and they're very different. But you can't, it's difficult to explain that to somebody who is not Igbo. To say, okay, this is that Chigozie is God should bless, Chiagozie is God has already blessed. They just hear the sound and they think it's the same name. So now by the time I got to secondary school, to the university, my first name actually is Frederick. So for everybody, that's people, they don't know you before. So they just see the name that is on your what do you call it, your registration is Frederick Chiagozie Nwonwu. Everybody started calling me Fred. So I became all throughout my university. And then when I started writing as a journalist, I started writing as Fred Nwonwu. So everybody knew me as Fred Nwonwu for years. Every work I did then was Fred Nwonwu. Then one day I had this sort of an epiphany, and I'm like, why am I Fred? What was I didn't know what Fred meant. Funny enough, I've never checked, and that was the first time I'm like, let me check the meaning of this name. And I checked the Germanic name that means king. I'm like, but why did I have to go and check what my name meant before? I know I should know what my name. I'm like, no, I'm not going to use the name. So on my own, I dropped Fred as my first name. I started writing Chiagozie Nwonwu. So you see the different dynamic.
Evolution.
Now, how did I become Mazi Nwonwu? I was having a conversation with a Maiduma long time ago. He probably wouldn't remember this. And I said Mazi something. And Ima was like, Mazi, does that mean chief in Igbo? So Ima Iduma is Igbo. I'm like, you are an Igbo boy. You don't know that Mazi means Mr. Yeah. So I went to look just out of play and I wrote Mazi Nwonwu as my name, and that was it. And before you know so the name stuck, and then I became Mazi Nwonwu, and then I had it as my pen name. So that's been my issue or my struggle with identity over the years. Not a big deal, but then it could also be a very big deal. So for my characters, they experience this struggle in different ways, not with their names. For Bama, it's more of accepting who he is or believing that who he is true. Because if he had witnessed his grandfather's time, probably he wouldn't have that struggle. But because he only witnessed his father, who had actually failed over and over and over and over again, so he felt probably this is not true. So he never believed that it's possible for him to actually be that's who he was told he is. So that's his own struggle with identity. For Bama's own, it's peculiar because, the circumstance of his birth, his mom, his dad, and they're not even knowing his dad until he got to know his dad.
That's for Daddy.
Yeah, that's for Dadzi. So Dadzi's zone
Yeah.
is actually quite different, but then even more complex because
Yes, it's more
respect a
complex.
young man. Yeah, it's more complex. A young man that was born uh, with his circumstance of birth, definitely there is going to be a lot of psychological. So, and I try to play that out in the story to show that this guy is going through a lot of psychological issues. And then having a mother that could basically control his life from with no matter where he is even a little bit
Yeah.
difficult for him. So now that's his own challenge when it comes to his personality and then his
His
identity. And at the end
identity,
of the
yeah.
day, I think he came to terms with all of those identities and then became his own person. In the end, I made it out that in the end, the choice of what happens to him is his ultimately. And he was the one that made his choice. Okay, this is what I want to do. And then he did it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's such an interesting question that you like. I sometimes when I think about stories, I think I consider them as questions that authors are asking. When you're
Yeah,
interrogating an idea. So when the circumstance behind dad's birth,
yeah,
conception, and
yeah,
upbringing, it's sort of like a question that is in the mind of people that are thinking towards the future because we are not so
yeah,
far from that future,
yeah,
And the question now is where is the ethics of it? Where is the logic? Where is the law? Where is like all of these loopholes have not even been discovered yet.
yeah,
And for instance, there was a situation that happened. I saw it somewhere on the news last week. Someone used a deep fake to frame a
yeah,
man for making racist comments, and
yeah,
it went viral. Everybody they cancelled him, and then they found out that it's actually a deep fake. And now
yeah,
they're like, okay, what are the laws that can protect people from things like this, from using AI to sort of like do harm instead of good?
yeah,
So honestly, I love that. So
yeah.
one more story that we're going to talk about before because I don't want readers to I don't want us to sort of like discuss all the stories here.
Well, I think we've been careful so far.
Yes, we'll be very careful. Thank God. So I'm going to
Yeah,
talk about the story that has a virus. The story that
yeah.
has a virus, and
That's
I'm really, really
deletion.
yes, deletion. Yes, I didn't want to say the name, but yeah. So deletion.
Okay.
So I actually found it very interesting. I found it very intimate because of the point of view. So
Yeah,
it's using first person point of view, and we
yeah,
are fully immersed in the characters in the girl's psyche. I think it was a girl,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So was that inspired by COVID? Did you write that
No, no,
during
no, no, no.
COVID?
That's right. That's an old story actually. So that story is probably the second. That's probably the second uh, speculative fiction story that I managed to publish in Nigeria. I think the first one was a story that was published by African writer years ago, and the title "The Totem." I didn't put. I don't know how I didn't put that in this collection. And I'm beating myself up because I totally forgot that story. Then this one was published by Saraba. So
Okay.
because that was one of the reasons why I established Ominana, which is why I felt this collection is very, very important in the sense that it sort of captures what I call the
Mm,
history of speculative fiction in Nigeria and then in Africa because of the stories that are contained in it, and then the story behind the stories, how I wrote them and then how I got them published. So a couple of years ago, I sent that first story to African writer and it was published, and then people liked it. It was more
mm,
fantasy, magic realism kind of story. And then I wrote Deletion and I sent it to Saraba. Saraba was about the one of the very few literary magazines existing then. And Saraba
mm,
accepted it. And then the good thing about it was after it was published, it became the most read story for that particular edition of Saraba.
mm.
And by then, it was probably the first time that a mainstream, I'll use the word mainstream magazine in Nigeria would
Magazine, yeah.
accept a science fiction story of that nature. Because back
Mm,
then, people used to say, no, we don't. Then I remember that even awards in Nigeria would tell you, we don't accept science fiction. Magazines we say we don't have science fiction, and you'll be wondering why. What is it about science fiction? So it became almost like a crusade for me to ensure that I get stories published, and then ultimately set up a magazine that will publish exclusively speculative fiction stories. So that story was published by Saraba Magazine way before. Sorry, I can't remember the year now, but probably 2014 or 2013. It's a long time ago, actually. I remember it a couple of days ago, but I've forgotten now, but it's a long time ago. So it had a little bit of COVID. So for a lot of the stories I write, I don't know. I know a lot of writers don't like talking about how their personal lives sort of find their way into their stories. So a lot of stories I write actually come from or have elements of what I feel at that moment in time. So I wrote that story at a time when I wouldn't say I was in darkness, but it was a time that I was dealing with a lot of stuff. So my thoughts went to fatality, more or less, not suicide. Wow. But I was just thinking about what is it about the world, but what happens when people are not here anymore? What if somebody somewhere, your life is no longer in your hands? It's been decided for you that at so point in time you are going to go, and then what happens? And then I thought about the story, and then I wrote it. It was supposed to be a series. It was supposed to be that story, and then 2 more parts of it. I wrote snippets of the concluding parts, but I never published them. And it was basically about that lady, and then what happened with her, and then how could. So basically, it's like you've given up on life, and then out of nowhere, there's that glimmer of hope that you didn't want to take. But then, because you are human, we are by nature very, very what's the word? Optimistic.
Optimistic.
We always, every time we hold on to that prayer that something is going to happen, that is going to change.
And something does happen, because your story proves the idea, right? Because someone did reach out.
But she wasn't expecting it. So that's it. That was like the switch. She wasn't expecting that anything is going to happen, because from all indication, nothing was meant to happen. But then something happened. But we don't know if something happened. We just know that, okay, there's that hope. Hope now became real. For somebody so it was. It was a story that I enjoyed writing. It was also an experiment for when you write a story that has a lot to do with interior monologue.
Maybe that's why I liked it so much.
It was
there's a lot of interiority in the story. That was really good. Well, congratulations on your debut. It's fantastic. It has a cover.
And it's a long time coming. I hope to have another book out next year, but it's struggling.
Give it to us back to back, please. I'm ready. Personally, I am ready. So before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about Omenala, because the work, it's been a long time coming. The amount of work that you guys have put in, the evidence is there, and I wanted you to just talk about it small in a short period of time, like how, of course, you've said this is why it was created, because there was no mainstream that was focusing on speculative fiction or science fiction, something like that. And that's why I was a huge fan of Wole Talabi's Shigidi, because it was the first time that sort of like a mainstream publishing house was acquiring the West African rights to a book like that, So it felt so good. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, this book is true, just like how this one is true as well. So about Omenala, what were the challenges you guys faced in the beginning, or how has the journey been since inception to now?
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned Wole. So Wole is one of our, so we do this stuff in a minute where we sort of own a lot of writers. So they're like family. So they're like every other success for us in a minute seems to be like our success. Every gain, every win that they get, it's like win. It's like it's us that get it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think Wole was in the very first edition of Omenana. I can't remember, but if not the very first, then the second or the third. Because the first edition of Omenana was in 2014. I had just left British Council then, I think in 2014. That was the very first edition of Menana. So that first edition was not, we didn't do a call out. We didn't do a call out for submissions. So because we didn't even know how to do a call out because, it wasn't a popular genre in within the continent. People weren't talking a lot about speculative fiction. The few people who were the one person that was pushing it, I think was just one person, was Ivor Hartman, a Zimbabwean writer who had African Raw and then the first Afro SF anthology. So by then we had done Lagos 2060 anthology with Ayo Aribabu. Lagos 2060 was supposed to be the very first anthology of science fiction stories from Africa, but it was delayed for some years, and then we now had the Afro SF one. I had a story in Afro SF one too, and I also had a story in Lagos 2060. So Ivor Hartman, Ayo Aribabu's collection of short story, I think A Fistful of Tales. A fistful of tales had some stories that were like speculative in elements in it. So it's something he was very much interested in. And I remember he wanted us we were in a workshop. So a couple of people, me, Temitayo Olufunlua, a couple of other writers, we had a workshop at Amaka Igwe's studio in Ikeja. Amaka Igwe was still alive then, if I'm not mistaken. So we had this workshop where the idea was to write about Lagos in the future, 50 years from then. That was in 2010. I'm not sure. I need to be sure of the age, but I think it was in 2010. So it was like, write a story that would reflect Lagos 50 years from then. And that was how Lagos 2060 came about. That was the story that all of us wrote that from the anthology. So that kind of is the background of Omenana, because the coming of Omenana had a lot to do with all of these experiences, because I met people who were also interested in the genre, and people who were interested in publishing, and sort of segued into us forming Omenana later when I went to Farafina. Okay, funny story. I'll just add that here because I think it's very important. Sorry that I'm sort of jumping all over.
No, please.
We went to Farafina workshop in 2012. So at the workshop, we decided to do a collection or an anthology of sex stories. Basically, about 12 of us in the workshop came together to contribute to this anthology. So my story for that anthology was a science fiction story, almost like comic book-like science fiction story about a girl that has superpowers, and her superpowers is that she's got these hormones that secretes behind her ear, and that once she wants you to do anything, she can use those hormones to hormones or pheromones. Yeah, pheromones. She can use that to control you. So the editor for that anthology was Nwonwu. So after we've done our pair editing, we sent it to Chinelo, and Chinelo saw it, loved my story, reached out to me and was like, I write science fiction, and this is the first time I'm coming across a science fiction story about another science fiction writer, and we hooked up. So a couple of months after Farafina, I was working with British Council, and I went to Abuja for a training, and then I got to hang out with friends. So one of my friends from the workshop, Chika Odwa, who is a journalist, it was Chika Odwa, it was Gimba Kakanda, and Abdulaziz, a couple of writer friends, and came together to greet me. So we went to it, and Chika Odwa came with Chinelo, And then we
Okay.
had that conversation. We're talking. That
Yeah.
was now Chinelo was like, I had one sort of a magazine. I'm like, yes, I'm thinking about setting up a magazine. And she was like, I would like to be a part of it when you do, because she also writes speculative fiction, and that was how Omenana came to be. So, first edition, we didn't know who to pitch to or who to like do a call out for, because we didn't even expect that people are going to respond. So what we did was we reached out to writers that we know who are also science fiction, speculative fiction, and then the writers sent in stories. Not everybody did, but a lot of people sent in stories, and that was the first edition of Omenana. By the second edition, we did a call out, a call for entries, and then we got a lot of entries, and then that was how Omenana came to be. But I think we did not know that the impact would be as huge as it was, because the first edition was on a blog post. It was a blog. It was a blog. It was a magazine kind of thing. So I know how to do a little bit of web editing.
Okay.
So that came into play. So I used it and stuff. So it was a kind of in-house thing. We didn't expect that it was going to blow up, but it blew up. I think it was featured by WordPress. Then they used to do these features for blogs that are like interesting and stuff. It was featured on.
Yeah, I remember. That was a very long time ago.
It was a big deal for us in terms of the impact. Then I think it got away from us because we wanted to just do this niche thing, small thing for just our community, but then it got way bigger than us. But we made a commitment that we are going to keep doing it no matter what. It's been very, very, very financially draining over the years, because we've constantly had to use our own money to run it, because it's not for profit. It's never been for profit. We've wanted to make it for profit. I know there was a point in time that Okada Books wanted to buy it. I think I'm saying this outside for the first time, but we said no. And the reason why we said no is because it's our thing. It's us. So we sort of didn't feel comfortable enough to let it go commercial, because we feel that sense of community will be lost. So it paid off for us, because over the years we've nurtured a lot of writers who have gone on to become big-time players in the African and the world speculative fiction. Wole Talabi passed through Omenana, Suyi Davis, writers, Pemi Aguda. Pemi Aguda was damn good writer on her own right. Suyi Davis, damn good writer. Wole Talabi, damn good writer. We've gotten some people like Tade Thompson, Tendai Huchu. They've all submitted stories to Omenana. And the very funny thing with these people who submit stories from Omenana is that the same way we feel like their family, we get the sense that they also feel that they're family. So you get Wole Talabi sending money to us. He gives us money every month. He's been giving us money every month for probably the past 4 years. As a pay, he's one of our patrons in Patreon. So he gives us money every month. The South African writer that died last year, Nikud, is also a big time supporter. He gave us money up until he passed away, unfortunately. He was giving Omenana money. Suyi Davis sends us money. A lot of them will win awards and say the award money should be given to Omenana. So we get a lot of support from the writers. So that is why even when we feel, I'm tired of doing this thing, let's just let it go. But you are going to disappoint a whole lot of people. So we've gotten massive support from the speculative fiction community, a lot of support. They do credit us with saying that Omenana came at the time the industry was in attention to speculative fiction and sort of allowed us to form a community. But I'm not going to forget to mention somebody like Jeff Breman, who was somebody that came at that point in time and was able to basically force us into forming this very tight-knit community that later turned up to become the African Science Fiction and Fantasy Society, ASF, that does the No More Awards. And at the point I'm at the no more awards. Whenever the awards come out, it's writers that win. But now we don't win as much as we used to do because the space has gotten way bigger. So we have a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
that's a
magazines.
good thing.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
have Western magazines publishing writers from Nigeria, writers from South Africa, writers from Kenya, which we're very, very happy about. So
Mm.
I think one thing that we did that I think worked for us was that we had this, I wouldn't call it mentorship, but we had this system where one, we pay for the stories. There
Okay.
were like 2 years when we did not pay, but apart from
Mm.
that, we did not pay when we didn't have the funds to pay. We continuously paid for the story. It's not much. For a Nigerian writer, it may be 10,000 naira then or 20,000 naira now. It's a
Mm.
token. 8,000, it's a token. If we have special editions, we pay as much as maybe $100 for special editions, which we do in collaboration with some other people. But
Mm.
the thing that I felt work was basically the fact that these writers who are greenhorns, who are rookies, who are fresh writers, we send the story, and then if we find the story very exciting, no matter how, whether it's not well written or not, we take the story and then we work with the writers to get the story to the best that we can get it to
Yeah.
before publishing. This is an experience I didn't have when I started writing. I didn't have it.
Mm.
There was feel like that. So you do your story, you send it to African writer. Most times they just help you look at the punctuations and stuff and
Mm.
publish it.
Yeah. And
And
copy
now
edit
have
it.
this back and forth. And I think that helped a lot of writers to get better at their craft. And then, because if you see some of the stories that writers submit to us, like maybe submitted to us like maybe 3-4 years ago, you can't compare what they're writing now. They've grown
Yeah.
so big and marveled. And then also, one thing that I think Omenala did very well was the fact that we've been able to show the different stories that could be written or the different directions you could take a story. So people who want inspirations about stories they want to write go to Minana and they read stories from writers we've published, and it gives them ideas of what they could do. So that has contributed in the growth within the
In the
sector and
expansion, yes. So
got a
you
lot of
look you look
more
you look at
writers.
it and then you come up with something similar or
Yeah,
is set in the same
yeah,
universe or
yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
And
Ah,
also,
that's
before, when you used to struggle, you wonder, okay, if I write this story, who am I going to send it to? People know they send their
yeah.
to Minana. So it's a Minana story. There's no shake, no questions about that. So that has also helped very, very much over the years. So I think Minana has done well, in my opinion. We could do better. The reason why we're not doing better is because it's still a passion project. It's still a passion
Yes.
for us.
Please,
Though we're
you guys
changing that.
should always ask for donations as well so that people can
Yeah.
can,
We
can
do,
donate.
but we do. But one thing that we're trying to do now is we're trying to bring in more young people. We have Damilale, one of our young writers. He's a journalism major in the UK. He's working with us now, and he's somebody who is very keen on editing. So we brought him in, and he's done so well within the short time that he's been with us in terms of trying to change the shape of the magazine. And I'm letting them do that because I'm seeing I don't have as much time as I used to have.
Yeah, as you used to
The
have.
board doesn't have the time she used to have. So we need this young blood to like come in and like take over so we can step back. We had somebody else, another writer, come in to also try the same thing. So we're also looking to see how much change he's going to bring in down the line, because the idea is for us to take a step back and then allow these younger writers and editors to like take over and then have their own vision, so that
Yeah.
I'm sure they're probably going to do things way better than we have done, because what we did is we've laid the foundation. It's been 10 years.
Yes.
It makes it 10 years of Minana, and that's a long time. So
That's a very, very long time.
yeah, that's a
Awesome.
long
Thank
time.
you.
That's a long time. Yeah.
But this is coming from a young person saying thank you very much for laying the foundation. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for Uminana. It's been very incredible having
It's
you
for
as
the
a guest.
culture, like they say.
Yeah,
It's
it's
for
for the
passion.
culture.
It's for the
So,
culture, for passion.
yeah. So, our time is up.
Yeah.
For our listeners at home, I'm going to add a link to get this book from our website, How to Make a Space Masquerade. We ship worldwide. Roving Heights delivers anywhere you are around the world within Nigeria, and we have a lot of event options. We have a lot of delivery options as well, because logistics is a big issue in Nigeria now. So
Yeah.
we did our best to sort of like have like these three options from cheapest to the most expensive. So anyone can order this book and it will be delivered to them. So thank you very much for joining me, Mazi. I
So
really,
thank
really
you very
enjoyed it.
much. So before I go, I need to mention that, okay, I thought I made it, I said a story. I gave two instances of conversation I had with Imai Duma. So
Okay, yeah.
Dotun, you see, was around when we had all of those conversations, because we all used to we all used to like move together way back then. We all used to have this same passion for books. We had book engage, and we used to like always be. I posted a picture, sorry, on Facebook about 2 days ago, and it was a picture of me, Imai Duma, Abubakar Adam Ibrahim, Azafi of Parisha Books, and I think Olofunla. What's his name? Olofunla. I know he's Temitayo's brother. I can't remember his name. And this was years ago when Abubakar had a book engage reading in Yaba. A book engage was organized by Dotun way back years ago. So that's how far we've all come with this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Yeah. So thank you very, very much for having. I hope I've not spoken too much, because when I get into this, I talk.
No, that's why I love this, because I love being, swept into it and fully immersed. I love listening to people talk at the same time. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for listening to that episode. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, follow the Roving Heights podcast any and everywhere. And if you check the description of this episode, you will see the link to purchase Mazi Nwonwu's book from our website. So I'll see you guys on the next episode. And if there's any writer you want me to interview, any book you want me to discuss with the author, leave the title in the comments of this episode. There will be an option for it on Spotify and on YouTube as well. Okay, bye.